mic on, so I have to be careful what I say.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Courtney Smith, and I'm the Dean of the School of Diplomacy and International Relations here at Seton Hall University. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our conversation with Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the United States Ambassador to the United Nations. It feels good to be back together again for our first in-person World Leaders Forum event since September of 2019. And I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to all of you joining us virtually across the country and around the world. You will learn more about Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield's distinguished 35-year diplomatic career in a moment when she's formally introduced by one of our students. We first invited the ambassador to visit campus as part of our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice initiative when she was leading the Africa practice at the Albright-Stonebridge Group. She accepted, but fate intervened, and she was nominated to be our U.S. ambassador to the UN before we could finalize a date. However, we're very pleased to have the opportunity to follow through on her visit now, especially given her current role. She continues our tradition of hosting the U.S. ambassador to the UN on our campus, following in the footsteps of Samantha Power, Susan Rice, and Zahmed Khalilzad. Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield has been honored on multiple occasions during a career which has seen her rise to become one of the senior-most black women in U.S. foreign policy and a member of President Biden's cabinet. She is well known for her trademark Gumbo diplomacy, through which she makes personal connections with foreign dignitaries while preparing and sharing the Cajun dish from her home state of Louisiana. This is but one of many issues and themes we'll explore in the following conversation. Now, I've researched the UN for nearly 30 years, and you all know I would have a very long list of questions that I could ask our guest. However, in true School of Diplomacy fashion, we're going to lead things off with our students, and our 8 students sitting around me are going to take the lead. After they've had a chance to ask their questions, we'll have questions from the audience at the mic in the front of the stage. To begin things, I'd like to invite Jarrett Ding to introduce Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield and ask the first question. Jarrett?
Ambassador, it's wonderful to have you today, and thank you so much for speaking to us. My name is Jarrett Dang, and I'm a senior in the School of Diplomacy. And it is my privilege to introduce all of you to our esteemed guest today, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield was sworn in as the permanent representative of the United States of America to the United Nations on February 24th, 2021. She also serves as a member of President Biden's cabinet. Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield, a career diplomat, returned to public service after retiring in 2017 from a distinguished 35-year career with the U.S. Foreign Service. From 2013 to 2017, Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield served as the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, where she led the bureau focused on development and management of U.S. policy towards sub-Saharan Africa. Prior to this appointment, she served as the Director General of the Foreign Service and as the Director of Human Resources, leading the department's 70,000-strong workforce. Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield's Foreign Service career includes an ambassadorship to Liberia from 2008 to 2012 and postings in Switzerland, Pakistan, Kenya, the Gambia, Nigeria, and Jamaica. Once again, Madam Ambassador, welcome to the School of Diplomacy, and we are honored to have you here. And if I could get us started, Ambassador, I'd like to ask you the first question.
Okay.
All right. And just to preface, as a student studying diplomacy and international relations, for the past 2 months, I've been really absorbed by the news coming out of Ukraine. And some would say a little bit too absorbed because my time on Twitter has gone from here to here in the past few months. But something that I noticed at the beginning of the conflict was how it began. On the day of the Russian invasion, troops crossed the border as the US and other world leaders were meeting in the UN Security Council to avert a war. And thus far, we've seen a failure of diplomacy to prevent and solve the conflict. But what is your message on the future of diplomacy amid what we've seen so far in Ukraine?
It's interesting that you raised that eventful day. We were in an emergency meeting of the Security Council in the evening. It was a Monday, I think, and it was a U.S. holiday. So I hadn't been prepared to go into the council that day, but one thing that I learned in this job is you always have to be prepared for whatever may occur. So we were sitting in the council. We had warned the world that this was happening. Diplomacy had been, our diplomatic tools had been used widely. President Biden met twice with Putin, talked to him several times on the phone. Secretary Blinken had met with his counterpart, Foreign Minister Lavrov, and in fact was supposed to meet with him that week. And so we had tried the diplomatic route, the negotiating table, to bring the Russians to the table to address their security concerns about Ukraine. And those efforts did not succeed. And so we started warning the world. We declassified information that we used to warn everyone about what was happening. Russia had 100,000 troops on the border with Ukraine. And even as I raised this in the Security Council, my Russian counterpart said, it's our country. We have a right to put our troops wherever we want to. And I remember saying to other people in the council, how would you feel if he had 100,000 troops on your border? So we're sitting in the council and we're having this back and forth discussion, and suddenly there was a buzz in the room. Everybody was looking at their phones, me included. I got a message from the Ukrainian permanent representative. The attack has started, and I messaged him back. I didn't expect it to happen while we're sitting in the room. I'm going to ask for the microphone again. And so we listened, and then I got the microphone again without written remarks at that point. I have to be prepared to pull it out of my head, and then responded that this attack, what we had warned was happening, and we know the rest. And we've seen it happen over just past 5 weeks, the devastation, this unconscionable war against the Ukrainian people. The broken lives that we're seeing every single day. We have not given up on diplomacy. We continue to support the Ukrainians who are meeting on a regular basis with the Russians, the French, the Turkish, others have engaged with the Russians to bring them to the negotiating table. They clearly do not want to negotiate. They want to destroy Ukraine. I traveled to the region 2 weekends ago. I went to Moldova and to Romania. I met with government officials. I met with the United Nations. But most importantly, I met with Ukrainian, almost all women and children. There's been, I think the numbers have gone up recently. 11 million people have been forced from their homes. Somewhere around 4.5 million of them are refugees in bordering countries. 6 million are displaced inside of Ukraine, and the devastation continues. I was reading this morning that they've resumed attacking in the Donbass region. We still think that a diplomatic I won't call it a solution because the devastation of the war is there, but a diplomatic end to this is possible. But in the meantime, we're ratcheting up pressure on the Russians. We have isolated them in the Security Council. We've isolated them in the General Assembly. We've had 2 General Assembly resolutions in which we got 140 plus votes condemning the Russians and 140 votes supporting Ukraine's humanitarian assistance needs. And just this past Friday, we brought a 3rd resolution before the General Assembly calling for the suspension of Russia from the Human Rights Council, and we succeeded there. So they are feeling the isolation. It has not yet had the impact on President Putin that we would want to see, and what we want to see is for him to cease his attacks on the Ukrainian people. We are at the same time supporting Ukraine. We're supporting them morally and politically at the United Nations, but we're also supporting them materially and resource-wise. We've given over $2 billion in military support to the Ukrainians over the course of the past year, and that support will continue. We're also supporting the neighbors who are welcoming Ukrainian refugees into their country. And I don't know if I answered your question, but
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Speaking of Foreign Minister Lavrov, he actually visited our campus when he was Russia's ambassador to the UN over in the Beck Rooms. Some of you may have been there. Continuing on Ukraine, just for one more question, I'd like to invite Taylor to go next.
Good morning, Madam Ambassador, and thank you again for sharing your valuable time and insights with us this morning. Like Dean Smith said, my name is Taylor Rodier. I'm from Marion, North Carolina, and I'm in my final semester of graduate school here at the School of Diplomacy. And I've specialized in foreign policy analysis and international security during my time here. My question concerns the United Nations Security Council and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Russian Federation held the presidency of the Security Council at the time of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and has repeatedly used its veto on resolutions regarding Ukraine. This has placed a significant burden on the Security Council and the Permanent Five by extension to maintain legitimacy as the UN's most powerful body. What do you believe is the best course of action to legitimize the Security Council, even as the Russian Federation maintains its permanent seat? Thank you.
yeah, unfortunately, the fact is they have a permanent seat. I always remind people that it's not just the seat on the Security Council, it's a permanent seat. And given that this was defined in the creation of the United Nations, there's not much we can do about that. But what we can do and what we have done is we've isolated them. Mm-hmm. So we have been able, while they have the veto power, and I say regularly, they can't veto our voices, and they can't veto the condemnation that they're getting in the Security Council. When we brought our first vote forward in the Security Council, we got 14 votes. Now, 12 of them were strong condemnations of the Russians. The other 3 were abstentions, and the only veto was Russia. Mm-hmm. So they were completely isolated. They were even isolated from their Chinese brethren, who decided at that point that they would abstain. They would not vote with. They would not vote with Russia. Even in the Security Council yesterday and the day before, where we were talking about the issues related to the impact on women, every single council member spoke about the devastation of the war. So they are feeling the isolation, and that's what we have to continue to do. And I think the Security Council has been unified in that sense. And I think we've seen that we can have some control even when a country has the veto power. We have been able, for example, to go into the General Assembly when our resolution failed in the Security Council, failed in the sense that Russia vetoed. We then took it to the General Assembly and got 141 votes condemning Russia. And that was beyond our wildest dreams. So our hope was to get at least 120 votes, because that's what we got on Crimea in 2014. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, we got to get at least 120. So you're watching the screen as the numbers are piling up. And when we hit 141, there was a round of applause, which is very unusual. Mm-hmm. And when we brought the resolution on humanitarian assistance before the council 2 weeks ago, and it was the same thing. We're all watching the screen. And again, our goal was not to get below the 141. And so it got to 135, and we were all holding our breath. And 135 was good. It wasn't a defeat, it was a win. But we're all holding our breath. And then 136, and 137, and 138, and then 140. And that's where it ended. So we didn't get to 141, but the difference doesn't matter at this point. So again, all I can say is they are isolated, and we will continue to ratchet up that isolation until we get them in the right place, and that is to cease their attacks on Ukraine and withdraw their troops out of Ukraine.
Thank you very much. We're going to shift the conversation a little bit more broadly to your career as a whole, and I'd like Chimdi to go with the next question.
Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador, for joining us. My name is Chimdi Chukwukre, and I'm originally from Lagos, Nigeria, and I know you've been to Nigeria.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. My question is a bit on your career, and I know you've had a very great career moving from countries in Africa to South America to South Asia. My question is on the fact that have there been moments during your stellar career where you've had your Americanness being questioned just because you are black? I know it could happen in Africa or somewhere. And how did you respond?
You know, I've always been very comfortable in my skin, Chimdi, and sometimes I will, I'll tell you a story. When I was in Nigeria once and I was in this meeting, and it was a tough meeting, and we were kind of punching back at each other in the meeting, and so someone in the meeting said, you know, you Americans, you don't understand us Nigerians. You don't understand our DNA. And as soon as I heard DNA, I'm like, I got him, because I had my DNA done. I'm a Yoruba from Nigeria. It says 38%. So I'm like, I'm gonna own it today. I'm gonna own it. So I let him finish just like blasting me because I'm an American. And I said, you got it all wrong. Because my DNA says I'm a Nigerian, and I don't buy what you're saying. As a Nigerian, I don't buy what you're saying. And it kind of changed the tone of the meeting. But yes, I have been in meetings. I went to a meeting once with my deputy, who's a very handsome, tall, white guy with gray hair, very distinguished. And we walk into the room, and everybody thought he was the assistant secretary. And so we walk into the room. I don't know why they thought he was the assistant secretary, and they gave him the chair behind him. It's like, no, you're supposed to sit there. I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'll sit over here in the corner. You sit there. And so, of course, they walk in the room, and everybody turns to me when the person I'm supposed to meet with, and the poor protocol guy who put my assistant in, not my assistant, my deputy, in the seat of honor, was like embarrassed, and he's looking, and I'm like, don't look at me, you did this, you know? So I'm very comfortable. I know who I am. I know what I represent. So if you put me in the back of the room, that's your problem. It is not mine. I am not going to accept your mistakes as my problem. And I don't ever feel like I have to walk in a room and pound myself on the chest and say, I'm the person in charge. If you don't think I'm the person in charge, guess what happens? You're going to be embarrassed. And so I let people get embarrassed. I let them make their mistakes, and I accept their apologies after the fact. And I encourage everyone, just being comfortable with who you are. You don't have to tell people who you are. Who you are is who you are, and when you do what you do, people will know. So.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We all know there are actually issues on the international agenda other than Ukraine right now, and we'd like to talk about a few of those with the ambassador. So, Ahmad, please.
My name's Ahmad, and first I'd like to just say thank you for joining us. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm a second-year master's student here. And my question has to deal with the conflict and the position on developing nations versus developed nations on climate change. And so the SDGs arose out of a compromise where developing nations felt that sustainability could not come about at the expense of their development. Both China and India, two nations that don't see eye to eye, successfully lobbied at COP26 on the text being phase down coal instead of phase out coal. So how do you convince nations where people are experiencing extreme poverty that it's in their interest to ensure drastic steps are taken to combat climate change?
It's tough, and I'll give you an example. I was ambassador in Liberia, and Liberia is known for many things. It's known for war and devastation, but what it's not known for is that they have some of the thickest and most beautiful rainforests left in Africa. But people cut down trees. And they cut down trees for coal, they cut down trees for farming, and of course we don't want them to cut down these trees. They still have the highest rainfall in Africa. I don't know whether it's still as high as it was, but it was like 247 inches a year, tremendous rainfalls because of these rainforests. And so we started talking to the Liberians about not cutting down their trees because the world needs those trees. And I remember in a conversation with someone from the Ministry of Agriculture saying, you may need our trees, but our farmers need land. And so one of the developed countries, who I won't name, offered to provide them $1 a tree for eternity. You know, it's like, here's your aid. And they're like, that's not going to do it. You need to pay more. Because our people, yeah, they're cutting down trees to make coal. They're cutting down trees to farm. They don't understand this thing about the rainforest. They don't understand this environmental thing. You have destroyed the environment, and now you're asking us to save it. And so it's not an easy conversation to have with countries who are still still developing and still need to go through some phases of development that might not be as climate and environmentally friendly as what we would want after years of contributing to the devastation of the environment. And so it requires some constant conversations, and unfortunately, it requires us to pay. We need to provide the substance and the resources for these countries to develop in a different way, to understand the impact of what they're doing today in a different way than we understood it 30, 40 years ago when we were coal mining, more than that, 100 years ago when we were mining coal. So it's not an easy conversation to have. It's a conversation we have to have, and I think we're having some success. But still a lot of work needs to be done. People are seeing the impact. I had a meeting last night with a group of African countries. I'm having what I call a listening tour with just groupings of countries from all around the world. And I met with the SADC countries, 10 of them. And I said, anything you want to talk about. And of course they wanted to talk about Ukraine, but they also wanted to talk about climate change. That in some of their countries, the rainy season has changed completely. So people are still trying to figure out when to plant. And they lost the whole planting season because the rains came at a time when they didn't expect the rains to come. So they couldn't plant. So their question to me is, how can you help us with this? And we have to listen at their concerns, and we have to figure out how to help them.
Continuing on a theme of helping other countries, I'd like to turn to Acacia for another question.
Hello. Hi, good morning, Ambassador. It's a pleasure to be here with you and share the stage with you. And thank you so much for taking the time out this morning. My name is Acacia Palmer, and I'm currently a senior studying diplomacy and international relations with minors in economics and Spanish. I'm also the founding president of the Black Diplomacy Student Organization, a Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Association scholar, and most recently a 2022 Charles B. Rangel Graduate Fellow.
Oh, great.
Thank
Fantastic.
You. So I hope to work with you one day, but my question is...
You better hurry up.
Duly noted. So, given the lack of access to vaccines in developing countries around the world, has the U.S. mission to the UN committed to supporting vaccine accessibility? If so, what policies or action items have taken place, and where do you think that they have fallen short? What would you recommend be done to improve accessibility if applicable? Thank you.
That is the most relevant question that I could possibly be asked. We had a meeting at the Security Council yesterday on COVID. And the U.S. has taken this very seriously. President Biden, when he took office, stated very, very clearly that one of his highest priorities would be to deal with the pandemic. And what we understood very quickly is we could not end the pandemic in the United States without helping other countries deal with the issues of the pandemic. We've given over 540 million doses of vaccines across the world. When I travel anywhere, I look for an opportunity to raise the profile of providing vaccines. If we have vaccines coming in, I was in Gabon as the plane was arriving, and I stopped everything to go and meet that plane arriving to deliver those vaccines to the Gabonese people. When I was in Niger, I went to a hospital where we provided vaccines to see the vaccines being put in people's arms. When I was in Thailand, we provided vaccines to healthcare providers, and I went to the hospital where they were getting their vaccines into arms. What we have discovered is providing vaccines is not enough. It is getting the vaccines in arms that is the important thing. And what we're seeing in many third world countries is the infrastructure is not there. So we're providing vaccines that sometimes expire before they get to people. And we're not giving people vaccines that are about to expire. That was a big criticism, that we're sending vaccines over as they're expiring. We're sending vaccines over, but the infrastructure is not there. The cold chain is not there because the vaccine has to be kept refrigerated. So we have to also, in addition to providing the vaccines, we have to see the vaccines get delivered, get stored, and get into people's arms. And so that means we have to work on the infrastructure. And the other side of that is giving the wherewithal to these countries to actually produce vaccines themselves in their own countries. And so we did make decisions to allow for the patents on these to be lifted so vaccines can be produced. We're working, for example, with 4 countries in Africa to help them become producers of vaccines so that you're not shipping vaccines from the United States across to Botswana, but you're producing vaccines in South Africa that can be shipped to Botswana in a matter of a few hours. So those are some of the things we're doing, but it is a high priority for the administration. Our vaccines are provided with no strings attached. We're providing vaccines based on need. It is not vaccines based on friendship.
Thank you. We have a lot of students in the audience, both in person and virtually, who are like Acacia and thinking about their future careers. So I'd like to have Linda ask a question on that theme.
Another Linda.
Yes.
Honorable Ambassador, it's an honor. Thank you for coming to speak with us. As you have heard, my namesake, my name is Linda Adebola. I am a master's student here at the School of Diplomacy and International Relations. I'm originally from South Africa, and I'm specializing in international organizations and Latin America and the Caribbean. My question to you, Madam, is if you were to give advice to your 23-year-old self right now on how to successfully navigate a career in the Foreign Service, what would you say to her as a woman and a woman of color?
Wow. I was thinking about what I was doing at 23. And I wasn't in the Foreign Service at the time. But what I would say to a 23 or anyone coming into the Foreign Service as a woman, as a person of color, is don't limit yourself. So I think there was a period when I first came into the Foreign Service where I defined my limitations instead of defining my potential. So I saw the limitations and I allowed the limitations to stand in my way from reaching what I think could have been my potential. And so let other people try to limit you and then fight them, but don't ever limit yourself. Don't ever stand in the way of yourself. One of my mentors in the Foreign Service, Ambassador Ed Perkins, who passed away last year. The thing I love about Ambassador Perkins is I've done 3 jobs that he did. He was our ambassador to the United Nations. He was Director General of the Foreign Service, and he was ambassador to Liberia. So all 3 places. And he's from Louisiana. So I feel like I followed in his footsteps. He pulled me out of obscurity. I was very comfortably obscure, doing a great job at what I was doing, but not seeking to rise anywhere. And he reached out to me and asked me to be initially his staff assistant when he was Director General of the Foreign Service. And so I went over for an interview, and he said, I want you to do this job. And I said, well, thank you very much, but I have 2 kids at home, and they're little. And I know that a staff assistant job requires you to do unlimited hours, and I can't do it. And he said, yes, you can, and I'll work with you. You can do it, and I'll get you out of here every night by 6 o'clock. Does that work for you? And I said, sure. Well, I never got out of there at 6 o'clock. Never, ever got out of there at 6 o'clock. But I'm glad he pushed me. Because he pushed me at that point, and my career was never the same after that. Mm-hmm. After I worked with him and met the people that he was working with, I met Desmond Tutu in his office. I met so many amazing people sitting next to him. I got to see what a real diplomat could do. And so he really mentored me and brought me, as I said, out of obscurity. I had many opportunities over the years to thank him for reaching down and pulling me up. And I do that every single day to repay him for reaching down and pulling me back up. So do not limit yourself. You're going to hit brick walls, and just figure out how to get around them. You're going to encounter people who will be blocking your path, and you're going to have to be like a football player and knock them down and get to where you need to go. So that's my best advice.
Thank you. So now I'm going to turn it to Savina to ask about one of your trademarks that you've been known for.
Thank you so much. My name is Savina. I was born and raised in Bulgaria, and I'm currently a senior at the School of Diplomacy. Again, thank you for coming here. Would you mind telling us more about your Gumbo diplomacy and give us some examples when you used it? Thank you.
So I love to cook, always have. My first job when I was 12 years old, and I know it was when I was 12 because for those older people, we get this Social Security thing that comes to us that tells us when we first paid into Social Security. So I first paid into Social Security when I was 12 years old because I worked with my grandmother, who was a cook at a Salvation Army camp during the summer. And I would go $1.25 an hour to work with her in the summer camp. And I started cooking with her. And she would cook 3 meals by herself with her 12-year-old granddaughter, 3 meals a day for 500 people every single day, just me and her. And so she would have me cut up chickens, which is probably the nastiest thing you can do in the world. But I learned how to cut a chicken up into 8 parts with a cleaver and go whack, 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 and have the chicken all set aside for her. So I learned how to cook next to her, and I love cooking. My mother was a cook. I had aunts who were cooks, and they taught us all how to cook. All of my brothers are cooks. We compare meals every day. My nephews are cooks. My nephew will send me a message saying, what do you think about this tea? And I'm like, it doesn't look too bad. And then I'll send him my gumbo, and he's like, that doesn't look all that good. And I'm like, yeah, but the people I'm serving it to, they don't know that it's not real Louisiana gumbo. So I've always cooked, and I've always enjoyed having people in my home. So when you're in the Foreign Service and you're living overseas, you kind of get some perks. You pay for them, but you get staff. So I always had a cook, but I never liked the food that my cooks made for me. So I let my cooks cook for me, but when I had people to my house, I would cook for them. You know, I'd like send my cook home on the weekends so that I could have people over to get a real meal. And so I would do gumbo. And I perfected the gumbo over many, many years. And then I started, people would come over, and I'm in the kitchen making gumbo. Here, take an onion, you chop this onion. No, you're not chopping it right, let me chop it myself. And taught them about the Holy Trinity. And I'm sitting there teaching people to cook gumbo, and they're telling me what's happening in their country. And what is going on and what's happening politically, as I'm just sitting there chopping onions and crying and smashing garlic and chopping my chicken to put in the gumbo. And so at some point, someone referred to it as gumbo diplomacy. I thought it was one young woman, and I said to her, you know, I'm going to start using this. And she's like, I didn't give you that phrase. So I don't know who gave the phrase to me, whether I made it up or maybe somebody in the audience will say, remember I told you about gumbo diplomacy? So remind me if you did. But what gumbo is, it's a melange of many different things put together. It's not always the same. For me, it's like soup, okra soup in Nigeria, which I love. And you just put a lot of different things together that might not really go together. Chicken and shrimp, and okra and the Holy Trinity, and flour and oil. And all of these things you put in a pot. And some of it you cook separately, and then you put it together and it blends. And the best gumbo is the day after. So if I make a really good gumbo and people like it, you're going to like it even better the day after, because the flavors sort of mix together and they become friends. And that's why I call it gumbo diplomacy, because you become friends. You get to know each other. You develop relationships. And you don't always agree. Like really chicken and shrimp in the same dish, they don't agree with each other. You don't agree, but you become friends and you blend, and it works. And so that's what I do. And the best time I used it, the president of Liberia, President Sirleaf, won the Nobel Peace Prize. And so I invited her over for gumbo, and I said, this is personal, bring your closest family members, and we'll have an intimate gumbo dinner. I think we may have ended up with about 40 or 50 people at the dinner that day, because people started hearing, it's like, oh, we hear you're having President Sirleaf over for gumbo. I really want, and the numbers just kept rising. And you can't make gumbo for 4. Never. Even if I only have 4 people over, you don't make gumbo for 4. I always make gumbo. I have a pot, I call it a monster truck pot, and it holds probably about 20 gallons. So it's like this big, and I carry it with me. I actually bought it in Switzerland. It's a Le Creuset pot, a really, really heavy red pot. And whenever I make gumbo, that's the pot I use. And that pot would serve 20 people gumbo. And like I said, if I'm having 4 people over, that's the pot I use. And then I just put it in Ziploc bags, put it in the freezer, and when people show up and they want some gumbo, I just pull a Ziploc bag out and thaw it out and give them a bowl of gumbo. But the Sirleaf gumbo was my best. I made gumbo for Secretary Condoleezza Rice, and I said, and I know this is kind of on the record, so I hope Secretary Rice doesn't hear it, but when I heard her knocking her spoon against the bowl, I'm like, she liked it. So I can give her another bowl of gumbo. But I think it works. It's not just gumbo. I do red beans and rice diplomacy as well. I do fried catfish and cornbread diplomacy. So food is diplomacy. And you bring people together. I argue with the Nigerians about jollof rice. So there's a competition between the Nigerians and the Ghanaians on who makes the best jollof rice. And I said, I know. I've traveled all over Africa. I know who makes the best jollof rice. And it's not Nigeria. And it's not Ghana. It's Liberia. And then the Liberians won it in Maryland.
We actually have a group of our graduate students who have just formed a culinary group called the International Relations of Cuisine. So I think they'll learn something from that moment. We have one more question from the stage, and then while that's being asked, any members of the audience who would like to ask a question, if you could please line up at the mic in front. And while you're doing that, we'll have Patrick talk about what comes next.
Good morning, Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield. It's so nice to have you here. My name is Patrick Condon. I'm a junior here studying Diplomacy and International Relations. And actually next semester I will be going to Geneva, Switzerland, where I'll be studying Migration and Borders, where I hope to focus on Ukraine and also Nigerian refugees fleeing Boko Haram, and hopefully one day be able to work for the UN, either in Geneva or in West Africa. And so my question is about the Security Council, and what are your top priorities for the US presidency of the Security Council in May?
Wow.
Big question, yes.
Well, this will be my second time as president of the Security Council. And so the first time we focused on food security. And I thought, this food security is not something that you focus on and it's gone and you never do it again. And so this year we were talking about, what are we going to do? And I'm like, food security, guys. And they're like, no. You're not the boss. You understand that very quickly when you're in a top job. Your people tell you what to do. And they're like, okay, we got 3 things we're thinking about. Maybe we'll focus on cyber security. We'll focus on COVID and maybe food security. And I'm like, okay, food security. No. And so we finally decided we were going to focus on cyber as our main focus, and food security as a separate event. Well, once Ukraine happened, food security was all over the place. We have the Secretary of State coming, and we're doing a full event on food security. And I am not one not to say, I told you so. So food security is going to be big, but we do have a separate event on cybersecurity, because we think it is really important that we focus on cyber. As we look at the situation in Ukraine and the cyber attacks that we have been under and others have been under, and we have to ensure that we have a cyber platform that is values-based, that protects the individual, and provides the rules of the road for everybody to work in the cyber arena. So it'll be that, and as well as food security, and then we have a separate event on COVID.
Thank you. The one request I have of our students and guests asking questions from the audience is just to keep your questions as brief as possible so we can get to as many as possible. So, Andrew?
Good morning, Ambassador. So my name is Andrew Travis. I'm a freshman here at the School of Diplomacy. I'm actually from Liberia. My family's in Monrovia right now, in Congo Town.
Really?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with you when you say Liberian jollof is the best. Sorry to the Nigerians getting this here. My question for you is, you mentioned Liberia needing to cut down trees to farm, and an unnamed nation offering money per dollar for trees. As the global south, especially sub-Saharan Africa, continues to develop and industrialize, and that's not something that's not going to happen, that method of $1 per tree is not going to work. What would you say is the best way that the UN can incentivize and ensure that the development in these countries, such as Liberia, is sustainable and isn't even more detrimental to their futures and the climate overall?
Yeah, we have to work to help these countries to develop the industries that are clean industries that provide electricity. When I went to Liberia in 2008, they turned on the electricity for the first time in 14 years. Yeah. People had no electricity, and it was hydro, which was good. There was a Mount Coffee hydro plant. Yeah. And we had little kids under streetlights studying. You'd see the bugs flying around under the street light, and the kids down on their knees with their books and their pencils because they had electricity available to them the first time, not in buildings like this, out on the streets, but it was important. And so we have to start working on building the infrastructure and building the industries that will provide jobs for people, so that people don't have to cut down trees because they need to make coal so that they can have fire for cooking their meals. We have to build those industries in the country. Firestone was there for years. It was an exporter of rubber, but they didn't produce anything in Liberia. So when they shut down, there was nothing left behind. They started producing some rubber wood for making furniture, which is really good furniture, but the market was never developed to do that. So countries have to put pressure on these companies to build sustainable industries for them. When I met with the Africa group that I met with yesterday, I'm like, here's an opportunity, guys. You have all kinds of farmland. Why are you not producing the wheat to be the breadbasket of the world? So Ukraine can't do it. Start doing it yourself. Invite some of those Ukrainian farmers to come and help build your farmlands so that you're building the capacity in your countries, not just to feed yourselves, but to feed the world. Nigeria, for example, is flaring and just burning energy into the air, damaging the environment. Why can't that be developed where Nigeria is providing gas to all of Africa? Because it can be done. So we really do have to work with countries, and countries have to want that, to build up the kinds of industries that will be clean industries, that will provide for the well-being of people and provide jobs, because Africa right now is the youngest continent in the world. The median age is 19. That means that half of Africa is under the age of 19. These kids are going to be looking for jobs. And if we don't give them jobs where they do good, they will take jobs where they do bad, which brings us to Boko Haram. It's why Boko Haram was, they were a terrorist organizations, but they also were an employer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Please.
Hi, my name is Lillian. I'm a second-year graduate student at the School of Diplomacy. Thank you for being here today. My question to you is on the Belt and Road Initiative that's China putting in Africa. How is that affecting it? What is the United Nations doing to kind of counter that, or the United States doing to counter that? How is it affecting the African nation?
Yeah, I don't think the United Nations is doing anything to counter it. And what I say to us is we have to provide alternatives to Africans. What I hear, not just from Africans, but other people around the world, is our preference is to have the United States there. We want you to come and build our roads. We want you to come and refurbish our ports, refurbish our airports, to help us build our infrastructure. So we have to work with American companies to build the capacity and the interest in coming to Africa to help them to develop their infrastructure so that they're not dependent on China and are put in this debt trap of having to owe their children and their grandchildren's futures to China because they've gone into debt to get infrastructure that they actually need.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Hello, Ambassador. My name is Sasha Ameling. I'm a sophomore here at the School of Diplomacy from Houston, Texas. So I definitely appreciate your stories about the gumbo and the southern United States. I definitely relate. So my question is about the lead up to the breakdown of diplomacy with the Russia-Ukraine situation. You could argue that this has been a topic of international relations since the fall of the Soviet Union. So I know you speak about isolation really ramping up now. Do you think that it's been ramping up since, obviously it's been ramping up since 2014, but kind of what's the history of that? Thank you.
I think I was reading an article actually while it was in the car, and this does go back. In fact, someone argued, it was Fiona Hill, that this goes back to 2008, and the Russians started to make noises about these issues and started to make noises in 2014, and they felt that there was no reaction. They went into the Donbas region, they took Crimea, and nobody reacted. And so this has been building over time. And while diplomacy has not yet worked, I am a diplomat at heart. You never, ever give up on diplomacy. You may have to bring other tools in, which we have. We brought sanctions in. We're ratcheting up the pressure on the Russians. But diplomacy is still available to find an end to this war. And so we have to keep working at that. So we support the Ukrainians who are really, they're the ones that are under fire. constantly, but they're sitting at the table with the Russians trying to figure out a way forward while Russia is continuing to crumble their country in front of their eyes.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
What we'd like to do is have a student present you with a small token to remember your visit. So, Savina.
Oh my goodness. A lunch bag. Oh, thank you.
And if you all could join me.
Thank you.
And if you all could join me in formally thanking Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield. We need to be respectful and make sure she gets to her next engagement. But thank you all for joining us. Thank our students for the questions, and thank you, Ambassador, for the words of wisdom you shared with us.
Good.
So.
Thank you so much, and I hope that at least one of you will join the Foreign Service or go into international organization for migration to work on migration issues, or work for NGOs, or work for private sector working overseas. There are so many opportunities out there for you to make a difference. We're reaching our sunrise in our sunset in life. You're actually on the rise. You're going to be the people who will change this world and make it into a better place for your children, but also for your grandparents to live comfortable lives until their end. So again, we have faith in you, we encourage you, and we appreciate you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And we're going to make sure you.
Okay.